Welcome, Paul, to this discussion about value-based GRC. We're here to talk about essentially our new concept, tying value back to governance, risk and compliance, and how we can reframe how risk and compliance is looked at by the wider business. Paul, could you talk to me a little bit about your background and why you view value-based GRC as important?
Absolutely. So my background for a good more than 20 years was in the professional services space, in terms of two of the big four, and actually spending all my time in the GRC world in those formative years of my career, helping clients solve their challenges, redesigning risk, compliance, and assurance functions for many multinational organizations. And led a sizable business in that space, which was the fusing together of designing frameworks and then delivering technology to enable those.
Very good, thank you very much. Okay, so to begin with, can we just look at the definition of value-based GRC and what you believe it means?
Absolutely. So for me, first of all, it's about looking at the GRC definition. So OSEG has got a brilliant definition in my view. So it's the capability to reliably achieve objectives, so that's your governance, address uncertainty, risk management, and then act with integrity, your compliance. So governance sets the direction and strategy for the organization, so that you can reliably achieve those objectives. And that's always done in the context for risk management as well. So risk management seeks to manage and understand uncertainty by identification, assessment, and monitoring of risk. And that's very much how ISO 31000, the ISO standard for risk management, defines risk. It's about the uncertainty on objectives. And then we've got compliance. So that aims to see that the organization acts with integrity and fulfilling its regulatory, contractual, and self-imposed obligations and values. And compliance follows through on risk treatment plans to assure itself that the controls are in the right place, we're managing the risks, and therefore we're acting with integrity as an organization.
And then if you're layering value on top, could you talk to me a bit about that?
Absolutely. So value, if we go to the dictionary and look at the definition of value, both from a noun and a verb perspective. So, to have regard, that something held to deserve, so that it's useful for something, it has value to one, it's important in somebody's life, has monetary worth, and we consider it to be important or beneficial. And then if we effectively take those and then think about what we mean by value based, we're generally referring to a system or approach that prioritizes achieving the best possible outcome or the results for the lowest possible cost. So in healthcare, for example, it means focusing on improving patient health and experiences while optimizing resource use and reducing waste. Now, the way I would look at it is there's three areas of value-based approaches within a value-based system. First of all, outcomes, so business outcomes. So this is about prioritizing what matters most to the stakeholder, the customer or the patient, such as improved health or quality of life or customer satisfaction. And we'll talk about what that means in the lens of GRC in a bit. Cost effectiveness. So it's about achieving the desired outcome as efficiently as possible, meaning we use our resources effectively and we minimize any unnecessary cost. And the final one is about that transparency and accountability. So value-based systems often emphasize transparency in decision making. Are we getting the best value? And accountability for the outcomes and the resource use. And so that specific meaning of value can also vary on the context and who you're viewing that value from. So value is in the eye of the beholder, essentially.
That's a very good point. So essentially, we're moving outside of just thinking about monetary value and the ROI and thinking about, for each individual stakeholder, what it truly means for them.
Absolutely. And when organizations often articulate the value of a GRC program, whether it's to put a new function in place or embark on a project or technology. It doesn't matter what it is. People always focus on the efficiency dimension, but actually often that is the one, in my experience, gives you the least of the three values. Yeah, it's great saving 40% because you've automated stuff, but that's not really actually going to give the biggest impact if you truly think about it in the right way. And it's not just about saying it, it's about how you think and structure your GRC program, your project, your software. And that's about the outcomes for the business. And the outcomes are all about how do we link it to what we're trying to achieve as an organization. So, for example, risk management for too many organizations is just in isolation. It's a function because we're required to do it. And rather than a value base, which is, well, come back to the definition of risk management, it's linked to objectives. So actually, if we think about risk in the context of running our business, what do we want to achieve in our organization? We'll have our strategic objectives, we'll have functional, we'll have entity, process, asset. Everything has an objective that it's looking to achieve in an organization, and should be, if you've done your governance right, should be tied through to underpinning the strategic priorities and pillars and objectives of the organization. And so if we think about then, well, what's the barriers, what's the challenges, what are the things in the road that we're going to come across as we're trying to achieve those objectives? Those are the risks, and how we manage those and how we understand where they are. Can we knock the barrier over? Can we remove it? Do we have to navigate around it? And those kind of different things are all about your risk management strategies. But if you haven't tied it to your objectives, how do you know it's coming? And how therefore do you make sure and give yourself confidence that you can achieve those objectives? So that's the kind of upside dimension of value-based GRC, because if you actually think about it in the context of what you're trying to achieve as an organization, and it's not about just risk management, it's about a multitude of different things when you start to link risks and controls and policies and issues and many other things together in the world of GRC, ultimately all link back to helping you achieve your outcomes as a business. You've also got the other dimension where people will think about principal risks, for example. So the big strategic risks, that's those that can ultimately bring down a business, right? So it's about the viability of an organization. And if you understand what those are, you've defined what those are, then again, how you link everything off that will help you make sure you steward, and stewardship is an important part of a board's role in essentially making sure that the business continues to be viable and succeed and flourish, or the organization, not just commercial businesses. And therefore that role is important, and GRC has a really important value-based role to play in an organization achieving its ambition. So if you come back to that kind of value-based piece and the outcomes, that is the most important thing on a return on investment assessment, in my view. It's about, and often people will say, well, it will prevent X fines. Well, it's a lot more than that, because it comes back to the objective. Let's think about, if we don't manage the risk properly, understand it, and everything that goes and links together with that risk, then we fail to achieve our objective. Let's say our objective was, we wish to enter a new market or launch a new product or grow by 20%. Any one of those things, there are strategic ambitions. That's the upside you can gain. But if you haven't managed everything in an interconnected way and driven the value out of your GRC program to help you do that, you may only grow 10%. So you've left 10%. So you've lost that 10% potential growth. You've lost that successful launch of that new product in the market. You have not successfully landed in that new market that new jurisdiction, whatever the new market is, and therefore you've pulled out. And so you've lost the upside. So GRC is not always about, so you've missed the opportunity. It's not always about the preventing the negative, as everybody thinks. And then on the risk reduction side, so again, thinking about business outcomes, we want to reduce risk because risk basically means losing money generally, or the viability of the business, or our reputation, which we trade on. And so risk reduction through effective interconnected GRC capability is about driving value. And so those are the important things that should be in a business case, not just the we save 10 hours a week.
Okay, so essentially what you're saying is if you have an effective GRC program in place, your business could ultimately achieve more and be more competitively at an advantage compared to others within the market because you're reframing how GRC is being used.
Absolutely. And what it does is it helps people also, your stakeholders, your shareholders, depending on whatever you want to look at it, have more trust in you as well. And let me explain that a little bit. If you can confidently say, we're going to achieve this as an organization, and you always achieve that, whether that's your quarterly earnings releases and your kind of profit expectations, and you have confidence because you can manage the risk around it, then that means that you are gaining the trust of the shareholders. And what's the impact of that? Improved share price. In terms of, it doesn't just necessarily have to be about listed businesses. It can be about your investors backing you and helping you go faster as an organization. It can be about the regulators trusting you because they know you're going to do the right thing and act with integrity because they've seen it. They believe that you can do that. And so it's about helping you achieve what you said you've achieved, but also it can make you go faster if you do it right. And in many organizations, when I've seen them do it right, they absolutely flourish. What's interesting is those that I've worked with and seen where they've done it right and really flourish is because they've learned through a painful experience, through an event that could have actually destroyed the entire business. And so made them realize they have to look at everything differently. But it shouldn't need to take a significant event that could almost destroy the business to make you wake up. And that's what we're trying to get across and talk about is the value that GRC can bring and how you help your leaders and your stakeholders understand how it can help them as well achieve what they want to achieve.
Okay, with that in mind then, can we go back and can we talk a little bit about sort of traditional GRC and how it's become this sort of piece that is viewed as negative, is viewed as a tick box exercise, and how we're moving from traditional GRC into value-based GRC? Why is this happening?
Okay, it's a really interesting question. So from my perspective and my kind of 25 years experience in GRC, I think it's a journey that everybody's gone on without realizing, and now it's the benefit of hindsight. So if we look back of what has happened and what has evolved, so GRC has been born out of, yes, there's lots of different things, managing risk and things like that have been around for decades in specific areas like high risks. Think about health and safety and those kind of things. But if you think about it writ large as a general point, it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively young profession compared to, say, finance and accounting. And what's happened is regulations have, in certain industries, and then others have kind of said, well, that looks quite good, we'll do some of that, and then it's caught on. Well, that's resulted in, because it wasn't an important pillar of achieving business success 20 years ago, organizations have essentially put a sticking plaster over a problem. New regulation, another sticking plaster, another regulation, sticking plaster. Well, that's gone wrong for us. We'll learn from that. We'll put another sticking plaster there. So what you've ended up with is a response, a reactive response to external factors. And as a result, you've got silos. And that is where the vast majority of organizations are today, a silo-based GRC system. Different functions doing different roles, not that interconnected. They will collaborate today, definitely more than, say, 10 years ago. But it's the minority still that have actually truly kind of gone, let's join the dots. Let's create a 360-degree architecture and make the whole thing flow for the benefit of achieving the organizational objectives and where we wish to go. So be the rocket booster behind the organization. And so that's the reason why where we are now. And also to interconnect all those data points and make things work as a seamless process and inform things, there's a lot of interaction of a lot of people with a lot of data. Technology has not been, 10 years ago, technology wasn't in the space it is today to help us make sense of all of those things, to make those pieces of information flow seamlessly, and for the different specialisms of GRC to interact in the right way. So we've got the how things have kind of evolved as a result of external factors and how organizations have responded, coupled with immature technology, I'll call it, in the past, have essentially held us back. But where we are today is now the opportunity, and it's the opportunity to drive value for the business.
Very good. An exciting time.
Very much so.
So can you give me some examples, because obviously you've been working in GRC for like the last 25 years. Can you give me some examples about different use cases where companies have outgrown traditional GRC and they're looking for this new kind of way of doing governance, risk and compliance? And that can be across people, process or technology.
I think you need all three of those elements to come together to achieve it. So, I've worked with a number of organizations, global conglomerates, where they've had those existential threats, like I referenced earlier on, and that resulted in them having a pivotal moment of, we need to join the dots together, and it needs to be aligned with how we're going to run the business in the future. And it evolves. I've seen that organization go from decentralized to centralized and back down to a semi-decentralized model. And the GRC capability has evolved with the business. So the people have evolved in terms of the roles and where they sat and what their responsibilities were. The processes have definitely evolved and become interconnected. And then the technology has been there to assist with the joining of those dots, to enable things like linking in intent as an organization as well as regulations into their policies, into their control framework, defining how they gained assurance over things and how that linked all the way back through to what they're looking to achieve as an organization. But with the appropriate delegation of governance and responsibilities and decision making to different layers of the organization according to what mattered to the group. If it was so imagine the group was a collection of essentially a fleet of ships, then they would define the icebergs or the rocks that would bring down one or more of the ships in the fleet. And so we want the fleet of ships going in the same direction strategically to achieve what we want to do as our goal. But we need to make sure we, as a fleet, avoid the big things that can bring one or more of us down. And that's the stuff that's governed at the top. But the maintenance and the smooth running of the engine and everything else on a given ship is devolved down to the captain of the ship and then everybody below them. And that, to me, is a fantastic analogy of how you should structure the interconnecting parts of governance, risk, and compliance, and then how you manage stuff so that you achieve your strategic ambition of where you're going as a fleet together, even though you've got the various different parts of the organization. Then there's other organizations I've seen who have effectively recognized, and this is very much more recent years, where we're going to start connecting the dots. And so many conversations now where, and I have to say, it's the younger organizations that are growing rapidly. So it's not the traditional organizations that have evolved, So the younger organizations that are growing rapidly tend to, because they're coming from less of a siloed based space, because they haven't had the history, are thinking from day one, we're going to try and create those dots, connect those dots together in the right way. So we're seeing more and more almost what I would term a digital twin of a physical organization. So representing the organization structure, then saying this is how we're going to achieve strategic group aims at each business unit and division and everything down, linked to our policies and how we set out our intent to our employees and to our third parties, how we understand risks associated with those policies, associated with our objectives, associated with what we've defined as being the principal risks that could challenge the viability of the business or create sufficient reputational damage and so forth. And then mapping that down into, well, how do we manage the controls to comply with the regulations defined in the policies, as well as achieve our objectives to mitigate the risk, and then into issue management and into assurance and into so many other different areas where then you have the ability, because you've created that digital twin, that replica of reality, that you can start to say, we've had an incident, a risk has crystallized. And therefore, that risk is also linked and recorded as can result in another risk happening. But it means we can get ahead of it because we know the incident's happened, this risk has crystallized. We now need to step up our mitigations to prevent this next risk crystallizing. That's resulted in us failing. We've not complied with something, so we need to let the regulator know. But also, that's knocked us off course on achieving this objective. So what are we going to do about it? It enables you to get ahead of it. And now where we're starting to see people think is starting to scenario plan. So you see it a lot more in the cyberspace, but it's one narrow area of GRC where you think about scenarios of different attack paths, as we would call it. And that thinking is starting to transpose into wider GRC, but people are lacking the connectivity of the various GRC functions linked together in the GRC capabilities. When you have that digital twin, you then can start to do your scenario analysis and look for, if this happened, what would be the consequence? Oh, well, we'd miss our profit target. We'd do this, we'd do this. And you can only do that because you can trace everything through the organization. And that's where the end game is for value-based GRC, because then we start to get into using more and more technology, AI, lots of different data feeds to help us actually map out how that works. And then we can start to see, well, what needs to go right for us to achieve our goals. And therefore, we need to make sure those things go right.
So essentially, from what you've been discussing, moving from reacting to things with these sticky plasters and moving into a proactive role where you're doing this scenario-based planning and testing, and you're kind of ahead of the curve, you've got that assurance and that confidence to be able to go to the board and say, if we do X, we're likely to get Y, and these are the things that we need to put in place.
Absolutely. And that's how you start to articulate and get people on board.
So thinking of technology then, because the examples that you gave, you spoke about interconnectedness and also flexibility. So the fact that as the business changes, you might decentralize, you might centralize, and you need technology that can flex to that. What have you seen in the market in regards to technology systems and providers and how they've been able to navigate that and help customers with that problem?
I think that is the challenge that most organizations find with the technology vendors, because most technology vendors have defined a product, a module that has got degrees of flexibility. Yes, we can change workflows, we can change forms, and we can build up an organization hierarchy. But each organization does it a different way. Two organizations in the same industry, in the same country, so they're governed by the same regulations, can have drastically different setups in a number of different GRC areas. And that's because their operating models are different. Their expectation, their history is different. So the sticking plasters they put in place were different to the sticking plasters the other organization put in place in the past. That influences where you are today. and where your leaders believe you should be going as an organization influences how well GRC is set up. And so vendors typically approach the market with this is how you should do it. And that is why we've seen a drastic shift in the last few years, that every organization, and yes, it will be for procurement and value for money reasons, but every single thing is RFP'd. And that is because organizations are looking for the right vendor. So to make sure that their square peg goes in a square hole and not a round hole. And that's essentially what people are looking for, is going through all those vendors, is they're looking for, where can I find the right one that's structured how I want to do things as a business? And that's the bit where the market has shifted quite rapidly from I'm buying point solutions to respond to a regulatory need, the sticking plaster world, to I need an interconnected capability, but it has to flex to my operating model as a business and where we are going strategically and how we run our business and what we're looking to achieve. And so you're looking for the ultimate flexibility across all GRC topics. Everything from the governance and the regulations, the policies, the risks, the controls, the issue management, the third-party risk management, compliance, assurance, audit, everything. If you want to create that true 360-degree complex contextual architecture, the digital twin, and make it fit your business, you've got to pick a vendor that is got that ultimate flexibility to achieve that.
And do you think the market's changing because obviously now there's been that much more time? So if you're saying GRC's the last 20 years, people are now a little bit more cynical and a little bit more aware of they're buying a tool and they need it to be future-proof because they recognise things do change very rapidly and they need their technology to last with them for the long term rather than the just needs of today.
It's definitely where organisations are starting to think. It is a very new trend, though, and it is not the majority, but it is increasing. As each month, quarter, year goes by, there's an increase in number asking those kind of questions and thinking through where their GRC program is going. Because fighting off redesigning the entire architecture in one go is a bold move and a significant investment, and very few will do that in one go. But many are setting a journey and they're making decisions on the ability to do things in the future, a year down the line, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. But when they're making investment choices, it's with those things in mind.
From your perspective then, do you think in regards to planning, it's better for a company to start with potentially one solution or use case, or to consider the full kind of ecosystem of governance, risk and compliance and map out that interconnectedness? What's better?
I think to get your best chance of success is you need your entire leadership community of an organization on board. Now, to do that, you need to map out a vision. You need to help them understand the value of GRC, but you're not going to deliver it in one go with the first implementation. But what you're doing is setting a vision, you're setting a roadmap. You're setting an understanding of architecture, and then you're addressing, I would say, normally more than one, probably 2, maybe 3 use cases at the beginning, because you're demonstrating the value straight out. If you go with just one use case, you've got to make sure you've got the buy-in for the vision, because it's going to be a while till you start to demonstrate the true value, because you're still in then a single use case, a single sticking plaster space. Doing 2 or 3 at the same time demonstrates the achievement and the realization of some of the benefits you articulate for your vision. So to me, that's your best chance of navigating getting the buy-in from your leadership and setting the tone and the direction as quick as you can, and you'll get benefits quicker as well.
Can you give me an example of a company you've worked with recently where they've done those 2 or 3 bits and then they've unlocked the wider value?
Yeah, there's there's an organization, a FTSE 100, I think, organization we work with, where it was very much, right, we are going to do risk, internal control, and internal audit to begin with. And the risk and internal control was the core focus. And that was in response to the new UK Corporate Governance Code requirements, in particular, the provision 29 around the internal control dimension. And that definitely set the kind of capability, how we're going to do things, and move the dial in terms of the leadership team understanding much more about risk. And they've done it right from day one. They have linked into their strategic pillars in the platform. It calls out their strategic pillars, who owns their strategic pillar. So it means those members of the executive can log in and see exactly the risks to achieving their strategic pillars. Then from there, we've obviously got the controls and we've got the assurance, but then they've now grown it out into now linking policies. So the controls are mapped to the policies, and the policies are interlinked with their HR system so that employees only see the policies relevant to their job role. And then from there, we've got third-party risk management added and data privacy. So we're starting to see the interconnected dots come together for them as they then help the organization link everything through to their strategic pillars, as they call it, for their organization, so they can actually understand how we get comfort and map everything through.
Just thinking in regards to like these big global enterprise organizations that cover a multitude of different regions, departments, etc. From that perspective, would you then recommend starting with one specific region and growing out, or going for that sort of global overview from day one?
Really good question. And it's going to depend on the organization and where they are in terms of their existing maturity, their processes. It depends what's in place today. And it's often an interesting question as part of any project or implementation. Some clients want to pilot, others just want to go big bang. And so it will just depend on comfort, change management capacity, because that's an interesting point as well, right? The technology is the enabler. Let's not forget that. It's not the bullet on its own. It's an enabling capability, people, process, technology. And too often people think, I'm going to switch the switch on for the tool and everything's going to work. You're digitizing a set of processes. If those processes are remaining exactly the same, there's a question, why would they? Because you're trying to drive to automation and efficiency. But let's, for argument's sake, they've remained the same. Then yes, that might work if the process is well bedded into your business. But inevitably, with digitization, it's unlocking the ability to make change as well in your process, how you drive things. But then if you just switch it on and haven't communicated to the business and done change management, guess what? You're not going to get your true value. So in that decision around one region, one pilot, roll out gradually or big bang, has to come your capacity to absorb change as an organization, and then the ability to help you realize the benefits you've set out as the objectives you've set as an implementation. And I come back to the objectives, risks to achieving them. And so GRC is within GRC itself in terms of rollout.
And it links back to that first point you made in regards to value being in the eye of the beholder. And if you go for this global approach, you need to make sure every single jurisdiction understands this project and understands how it will benefit them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Moving into our next question. So we're moving into like the strategic and objectives around value-based GRC. So how do you actually tie GRC to business strategy and objectives?
So it's really about sitting down with those that own the objectives and say, okay, you've got an objective to launch a new product. I'll use the examples I did before. Enter a new market, grow by 20%. So how are we going to do that? And what could get in our way? What could go wrong? What could go right, but what can go wrong? What will prevent us? What might happen? And we can start to unpack those in a multitude of different styles and ways of doing it. It's what works for the individual you're working with. And this is an interesting point, is round that table, any experienced GRC professional know when you're working with a board, you've got a group of varying personalities and styles around that table. And therefore, you won't be a process that fits everybody in the same way. You've got to work out what's going to unlock the information flow out of those people's heads, because ultimately they know they're accountable for achieving the objective they've been assigned, but they'll also know, along with their teams, what's going to prevent them. And that's just your first real basic stage. And then from there, what will help mitigate that? And it won't always be a control. You might have other risk treatment strategies. We might transfer it, might insure it, right, to prevent the risk or to mitigate the risk. And so there's lots of different ways in which we can kind of pack it down from the strategy, the objectives, and that can be at the group level. It can be at the process level. What's the objective of this process we're doing now? Why are we doing it? What are we looking to achieve? And what can go wrong? Now, most people would say, if we look at purchase to pay, a very standardized and well-known process, that's essentially what you think about when you think about your controls for that. You look at your purchase to pay process and you say, what can go wrong in achieving the outcome of buying the right things and paying the right people the right amount at the right time? Ultimately, there's some clear objectives with purchase to pay. What can go wrong? And therefore, what are our mitigations? And how do we get comfortable they're working? At its most basic level, if you think about it that way, now apply it to your group business objectives. Same thing. And so that is the best advice as to how to structure this. Now, for those more mature organizations, then they may also start thinking about risk management in the context of decision making. Whenever you're making decisions, you're making an assessment of risk. Do I run for that bus that I can see is about to get to the bus stop? Do I cross the road now? You make, as a human, a split-second decision based on your assessment of risk. And a lot of it's based on your risk appetite, and it's based on your experience. Experience says, yes, I can make it to the bus and I won't fall over running. Or, yes, I can cross the road and I won't get run over because I can see that car's not traveling as fast, or like lots of different things. And it's the same with decision makers at all levels of an organization. Every decision, even a really big, do we invest here to get a return? Now, yes, of course, people do investment analysis for some of those bigger ones, but are we truly thinking about risk and the downside? Often people just look for the upside, or is it likely to return? But what they don't do is think, well, what's the worst case that could happen? I'm going to make this investment, I'm going to make this new product launch decision, but what's the worst chain of events that could happen? What's the likelihood of that happening? And you can start to get into modeling, if you wish to, the most likely point, the most likelihood, the most likely cost impact, when that's going to happen. There's lots of things you can do using statistical analysis. And ultimately, people do those things when they're making decisions naturally. Business leaders make decisions based on their own experience and their own appetite for risk. And so what's interesting there is that's generally might be an investment committee or a different committee, governing committee, where it is a collective decision, which is good, although you have to think about the personalities around the table and who's got the strongest will sometimes. But it's about, often lower down, is people making decisions and they're making it in isolation. They are making the decision, it's based on their experience and their risk appetite. Have we set out a framework for decision making with risk management considerations? No. And if we look at so many things that have gone wrong for organizations, either catastrophic and the organization has failed, or they've lost a lot of money, or just certain things have happened, it goes back to somebody made a decision at some point to do something, and they didn't consider the risks, and they didn't think through or work through how do we manage those risks. And if you know what they are, you can manage them. And And so that is just a sample of a few things of how do we approach these things. It's first of all realizing some of this all boils down to basics, and then it's about putting process in place that will work for you and your people.
It's really lovely. It's almost like, as you say, going back to basics and stripping it right back and saying, like, okay, what are the most important things we want to focus on, and what is the agreed risk appetite that we have, and just marrying them together to achieve what it is everyone's going after.
Yeah, don't make it too complicated.
Yeah,
People can't follow.
not too complicated. Exactly. So when thinking about some quick wins for anyone who's watching this, what are some of the things that you would say that just tactically that people could be doing from straight after this webinar that could help them on their value-based GRC journey?
I think just start to draw out what the architecture looks like, and then start to socialize the concepts about how it can add more value to a business. It's not just about complying with regulations, and we're doing it because we're told we have to do it, but help people start to understand the value it can bring. So all the stuff I've talked about with objectives, the architecture, how things link together, define that. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than a bit of a diagram on a whiteboard, right? And it's not. It's what it is about asking the right questions. And if you sit in a risk function, you might need to get some of your other fellow GRC functions together in a room to do these kind of things. It depends where you are in the organization, but it's about painting a vision of how things will link together and helping those in the investment and decision making roles understand the value it's going to bring them and the wider organization. And articulating that value for the eye of the beholder is the key thing to your next conversation. So you might have the conversation with the CFO, the typical role that everybody says risk and control sits under generally. And they might, then you get their buy-in and they say, okay, I can see the value. And then that opens the door to the next conversation with the next exec member and so forth. And it's going to be that helping people understand how GRC can add huge value to an organization. And it's not just, we're going to prevent a data privacy fine of 4% of turnover and stuff like that. It's much more than that. And it's helping people understand. And that is really it doesn't need to be 6 months of theoretical thinking with some big presentation. It's about hearts and minds and understanding the basics. That's what needs to happen.
So when thinking about that communication point, then what kind of metrics or reporting would you say value-based GRC can unlock that traditional GRC might not have been able to?
Really good question. I think it has to be about articulation of risk reduction, about getting ahead of events before they happen, that people are actively thinking about risk, and then we're recording and capturing and managing that risk. It shouldn't be seen as adding bureaucracy. It should be seen as helping value. If it's seen as adding to bureaucracy, you've made the process too complex. But it's how to measure value, the metrics, to me is about, and some of it you might not see for years, right? But it's about trying to help people understand that I feel I'm more confident. So some of this is going to be quite intangible at times, and it's going to be more qualitative. It won't be quantitative quickly. Because one of the things, if you think about where people have made decisions and then it's taken 2 or 3 years for the consequence to truly show itself, well, that's when you realize you've lost a load of money. But that was traced back to a decision somebody said we should invest here. And so you're not going to see quantitative benefit overnight. You're going to see more realistically qualitative measures, and you're going to see more intangibles. But ultimately, if somebody says at a board meeting, I have more confidence now in my fellow board member being able to achieve the objective they own because they can articulate how they might not achieve it, what could go wrong, and what they're doing to mitigate it, that makes me feel good. I have high confidence they can hit that now. And our quarterly reporting is showing we're likely to hit it. Then you've kind of helped achieve a movement in, versus if it wasn't there, they'd be going, it's looking likely we're going to hit it because the quarterly reporting is going okay, but it might not still hit it because you haven't got confidence. You haven't got the surety of it. And it's that surety that will then help people make further decisions.
So the confidence piece then enables you to make those decisions in regards to like resource planning. So I was talking to one of our healthcare clients, and they said prior to using us, they could never justify hiring or replacing people with new heads because they didn't have the data behind it. But they now have that assurance and confidence they can point to X, Y, and Z, and that is because they've got that insight.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of time, so I'm just going to ask you one last question, and that is around value-based GRC technology. So in comparison to traditional GRC tech and value-based GRC tech, what are some of the things that GRC professionals should be looking out for?
It's the ability to connect for all the various components of GRC together, that architecture I've spoken about. So it's the ability to do that. It's the ability to help you create that digital twin of your organization so we can achieve those elements. But it's that it will work for your organization. There are lots of products out there that have predefined connections between the various different GRC elements. But will it work in your organization, for your operating model, for the people, your decentralized versus decentralized models? The maturity of the people you've got using it in your business, and so those are key factors. And to me, when picking technology, it's got to be about, you need to be able to clearly articulate your requirements. And when people articulate requirements, often it's just a list of features and functions. That's great. It says you've seen a bunch of features and functions before, you've got a great imagination and you can innovate. But what it doesn't say is, what are we digitizing? So make sure you can clearly articulate the process you're looking to digitize and the operating model within which that process operates. And then it's look at what the responses are from the vendor there. Now, if the vendor is truly flexible and they can make it fit and digitize your business for the 360-degree GRC architecture, and give you that benefit down the line linked to your objectives and everything, then if it's truly flexible, they should be able to demonstrate it. So there should be a challenge issued. Prove it. Now, of course, you're not asking them to build your final GRC solution as an investment, but you're asking for, prove this element, prove this element. And that will tell you a lot about the capability of the vendor as to whether they can truly deliver a value-based GRC system that's got all the GRC components interconnected, that can fit your business and your ways of working and your exact processes you're looking to digitize. And if a vendor can do that, then they're the one that can meet your need.
So process-led rather than functionality-led.
100%.
Very good. Thank you very much for this conversation, Paul. We do obviously offer complimentary workshops for companies where they have at least 3 senior stakeholders that want to come and do a lunch and learn with you. And we offer demos as well. As just a final key takeaway, what would you say for the audience that they should leave with as either an action point or something to consider in regards to value-based GRC?
Action point is just think about your vision. What does the architecture look like for you and your organization? And not just your function, but the collective GRC functions. How do you interplay together? How do you work together to deliver the value back to the objectives and the viability of the business? And then if you are looking for technology, don't write down a list of features. Define the process, the operating model. Features is fine, because that says how sophisticated you want to get, or what nice little bells and whistles you're looking for. But process and operating model should be number one on your list when writing your requirements.
Good. Thank you very much, Paul.
Pleasure.